Good morning, everyone. Hope you all had a wonderful Simchas Torah, wonderful Yantif. Okay, we're up to Perek Aleph, Mishna Test, Chapter 11, Mishna 9. Kashine Truma. Kashine is translated as vetch, which is a type of bean that was primarily used for animal feed. Now, these kashine, we'll call this vetch, is Truma. A Kohen may feed it to his animal, to a beast, if he owns a beast, like a deer, or if he owns chickens. He can feed the animal these Truma foods. Now, there's a couple of things that we have to talk about here. Number one, if this is animal food, then there should really be a question that something that is just animal food, you don't have to separate Truma from. And therefore, vetch is primarily an animal food, but it is also fit for human consumption. Not only that, the Rambam brings down that in times of famine, it was widely used as human food. And therefore, since it is edible to humans, there's an obligation to separate Truma from it. But since it's primarily an animal food, therefore, I can feed it to the animal. The Kohen can feed it to the animal. That's the point of the Mishnah. Feeding this food, this vetch, which is primarily animal food, which is Truma, to an animal is permissible. Any other food that's not primarily an animal food, you may not feed to an animal. That's considered like destroying it. Food that can be, that's fit for human consumption, you give it to an animal, that's not using it properly. That's like destroying it. That you're not allowed to do. So that's the point of the Mishnah. You've got this vetch of Truma. It's Truma because it is fit for human consumption. Otherwise, if it was only animal food, then there would be no obligation to separate Truma from it. Being that it's fit for human consumption, there's an obligation to separate Truma. But since it is primarily animal food, you could feed it to the animal. The Kohen can feed it to the animal, but he would not be able to use any other Truma food that's not primarily from animal feed to feed to animals. Next case, Yisrael Shasachar Para Mikohen. A non-Kohen, a Yisrael, who rented a cow from a Kohen. Ma'achila kashine Truma. He may feed it vetch Truma. Okay, so here's the case. I have this vetch. I'm separating Truma from it. I rented a cow from the Kohen. I want to feed that Truma vetch to the Kohen's animal. Says the Mishnah, I can do that. I, the Yisrael, the non-Kohen, who has rented the cow and is responsible to feed the cow, I'm renting it. So that means I'm just renting it means, I have to feed it. I have to make sure it doesn't get stolen or lost. If some unforeseen circumstances cause the animal to die, I'm not responsible for it. So I'm just renting it. Meaning that I'm just renting it, it is therefore considered the animal of the Kohen, and the animal of the Kohen is allowed to eat this Truma vetch. And therefore, since I'm only renting it, it's not considered like I own the animal. It's not my animal. It's the Kohen's animal. I can feed it to him. Okay, but there's a problem here. The problem is that the case of the Mishnah is that I've got this animal of a Kohen. I rented it from him. And now I have this vetch that I separated Truma from. If I go ahead and use that Truma to feed this animal that I'm obligated to feed, now it's true, since it's a Kohen's animal, there's no problem from that part of the kind of animal I'm feeding it to. But how do I have a right to fulfill my obligation of feeding this animal with Truma that belongs to the Kohen? It doesn't belong to me. So how can I use it? So the Bartanura explains that being that if I wanted to, I could take this vetch and give it to the owner of this cow. That's the case. I rented the cow from a Kohen. If I wanted to, I could give this Truma vetch to that Kohen. Instead of giving it to him, I'm going to give it to his animal. That's going to be considered like I gave it to him and he gave it to his animal. And add to that an important point that there's no reason to think that the Kohen wouldn't be happy with that idea of that, giving it to the animals like giving it to him. He's very happy if you use Truma to go ahead to Truma that would have gone to him for his animal, because now he knows that since it's Truma and you, the renter, can't anyway you can't use this just truma vetch for yourself in any other way. So you're going to be very generous to this animal. If you were just going ahead and having to use your actual food to feed the animal, you're going to give the animal what it needs, but you're not going to be overly generous. If you're using truma, it's not yours anyway. You're going to be more generous, and the Kohen knows that. So therefore, being that the Kohen is more than happy that you'll be feeding truma vetch to his animal, so so therefore the halacha considers it, the Mishna considers it as if I gave it to the Kohen. This is the manner I gave it to the Kohen, and he gave it to his animal. So everything's fine. It's the Kohen's animal. He's allowed to be eaten. The animal can be fed this truma. I'm not taking away from anybody. I'm taking away from the Kohanim by using this truma, because being that I could give this truma to the owner of the cow that I'm renting it from, who's a Kohen, and he'd be happy that I'm giving his animal the truma vetch. Therefore, it's considered like I gave it to him, and I'm now using it. It's his truma to go ahead and feed the animal. So that's the first case of the Mishnah that talks about the Yisrael who rented the cow from the Kohen. Now we have the other way around. The Kohen shesachar par mi-Yisrael. If a Kohen rents a cow from a non-Kohen from Yisrael, although he's responsible to feed the animal because he rented it, he cannot feed it, truma vetch. Because at the end of the day, this animal is not his. His animal is the animal you're allowed to feed the vetch to. You're not allowed to feed it to a non-Kohen. It's interesting that it's that the Bartanur brings down that the halacha of being able to feed your animal the truma vetch is based on a pasuk, based on a verse. The Torah says that the kinyan kaspai, that is which is acquired through money, with that which the Kohen acquired through money, you're allowed to feed that truma. The context of the pasuk is talking about a slave, but we know, but it's not just there. It extends even further. It extends to an animal. And it is there, the pasuk that says kinyan kaspa, it's got to be his thing. It's got to be what he purchased through money in order to be able to feed a truma. When he went ahead and he rented the animal from the non-Jew, he didn't buy it, he's just renting it. It's that cow still belongs to the non-Kohen, to the Yisrael. And therefore he's not permitted to go ahead and feed it to the animal that he's renting from the non-Kohen. So that's what it means. A Kohen shesachar par mi-Yisrael, a Kohen who rents a cow from a Yisrael, although its food is upon him, responsible to feed it, he cannot feed it truma vetch. Now we come to a very interesting kind of case. Excuse me. Yisrael shesham par mi-kayin. A Yisrael who assesses a cow from a Kohen. Case is like this. The case is that here's the deal between you and the Kohen. You took the Kohen's cow, and the deal is like this. You've got to make sure that you give back the Kohen the actual value of this cow. The goal is to take this cow, to fatten it up, to make it worth more money, and to split the profit of how much of its value that's increased due to the fact you fattened it up. But the deal is that you have to make sure the Kohen gets back, no matter what. You have to make sure the Kohen gets back the principal value, the value that it was assessed for when you made this deal. And you got to make sure that comes back to the Kohen. If, let's say, the animal dies, just all of a sudden drops dead, you're obligated to pay for that animal. And that makes a huge difference here. Because whenever you become completely responsible for something, that means, like for instance, when you borrow something, you become completely responsible. You must mostly responsible, I should say. You must you must give back or pay back this animal that you borrowed, no matter what happens to it. If, let's say, a bolt of lightning strikes down that animal, you're responsible to give back its value when you borrow it. The only time you're not responsible to pay for an animal you borrow is if it died while working. But if it just died beyond your control, we're not talking about it was stolen, it was lost, there was no negligence, there was nothing up for you to do more. The animal just died. Bolt of lightning struck it. Nothing you can do about it. Still, you're responsible for it. When your responsibility goes that far, that even for onus, that means something happens to it beyond your control, you're responsible, you're considered now the owner of that animal. So now in this case, what happens is is that, again, I have to go ahead and I have to make sure the Kohen at least gets back the value that it was assessed for. And the goal is to make it worth more money and to split the profit. But being that that's the case, Yisrael Shasham Parami Kohen, Yisrael who assessed a cow from a Kohen, and the deal is, as we've said, Lo Yachilena Kashine Truma. In this case, he cannot feed the animal Truma Vetch because it's considered his animal. And his animal can't eat Truma. The Kohen Shasham Parami Yisrael, but if the Kohen assesses a cow from a Yisrael, meaning from a non-Kohen, Machila Kashine Truma, he then is able, excuse me, he is permitted to feed it Truma Vetch, because now that he assessed it, now that he becomes completely responsible, he is responsible for the value of this animal. He's considered the owner, and therefore now he can go ahead and feed a Truma because it belongs to the Kohen. Now it belongs to the Kohen can feed a Truma. Mitzvah Saseli is not the Rabbi Kulei Kodesh. Positive commandment that the 4th year's yield of a tree is holy. Now we have learned that there is a prohibition of on the first 3 years of a tree, the fruits are arla. You're not allowed to have any benefit from them. What happens in the 4th year? In the 4th year, they become sanctified. Shenema, as it says, and in the 4th year, all its fruits will be holy for praising to Hashem. Pirushai, meaning, all the fruit that grows from the tree, meaning the ones that grow to maturity, in the 4th year of its being planted, there the law is regarding them, they have to be eaten in Yerushalayim and Jerusalem by its owners. The same thing like we had by the Ma'aser Sheni, by the second tithing. Nowadays, you redeem it with a pruta, with the smallest coin that's used in that place, as you do by Ma'aser Sheni. You redeem it, the sanctity goes onto the coin. And nowadays, we destroy the coin. And according to Torah law, this applies, ba'aretz and Eretz Yisrael, b'chol ilonis, all trees. All trees. V'chutz la'aretz, outside of Eretz Yisrael, yesh machlekes nohig. There is a question, there's an argument whether it applies. The yesh are those who say, the b'karim nohig b'chutz la'aretz. If we're talking about a vineyard, then that does apply outside of Eretz Yisrael, v'loy b'shari ilonis, but not other trees. So you've got some opinions that say there is no neta, there's no 4th year sanctity to the fruits outside of Eretz Yisrael. And there are those who say, some say it applies to all trees, and some say it only applies to a vineyard. This applies both by men and by women. Have a wonderful day.